Hello, you lovely humans, you book lovers, you people curious about the world. Welcome to Bookish. For 5 years now, we've been your virtual hangout for author conversations and for big ideas. I'm Sam Dunn, your host. Bookish is brought to you by the Southern California News Group and the Bay Area News Group, and everything we do is made possible by subscribers who support local journalism. You make programs like this possible. You make everything we do possible. You're the foundation and the reason we do what we do. And a little bonus, if you're a Reader Reward subscriber and you're tuning in tonight, you're automatically entered to win a $50 gift card to a great indie bookstore, the Arvida Book Company in Tustin, California. And last time the winner was, let me see, Connie Jameson. Connie, we hope you're enjoying your new reads. And hey, if you don't subscribe to any local news, here's your chance. If you're in Southern California, head to scng.com, subscribe to find your local paper. And in the Bay Area, go to bayareanewsgroup.com reader services to find your local paper. And you'll find out how good it feels to be a stakeholder in community news and supporting a free press. Oh, and another little thing, if you love repping your status as a bookworm, check out our bookish swag. Julie, I think you got the screen up. Yes, you do. A quick note, if you have questions during the program, hit the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar. And if you want to chime in or chat with fellow viewers, use the chat feature. And don't worry, you're not going to miss anything. We're going to send you a link to the full program. You can also find it at scng.com, virtual programs, and also on YouTube. So, speaking of journalism, tonight we have two mega best-selling authors whose new books mirror some of the huge issues we're navigating in our nation and in the world right now. Think ideological divides, conspiracy theories, geopolitical warfare. And after reading their works, it occurred to me that sometimes the best way to really grasp the news is through the perspective-giving lens of fiction. So with that in mind, I'm thrilled to welcome our first guest, Brad Taylor, talking about his newest novel and his exciting Pike Logan series, Into the Gray Zone. Hey, Brad, what's going on?
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Good. Oh my gosh, it's such a pleasure to have you here. And you guys, if you don't know Brad, here's the 411 on him. Brad Taylor is a retired lieutenant colonel and a 21-year veteran of the U.S. Army Infantry and Special Forces. And that includes 8 years with the Special Forces Operation Detachment, what we know as Delta Force. Brad retired after serving more than two decades participating in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom, as well as classified operations around the globe. His final military post was as assistant professor of military science at the Citadel, no less. He is a New York Times bestselling author of 18 Pike Logan thrillers and is a security consultant for various agencies. He lives in Charleston, South Carolina with his beautiful, brilliant, and awesome wife, Elaine. Hi, Elaine. And their two kids. Anyway, thanks again for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I was telling you before we went live that I was reading a news report recently, just a couple days ago, about how our power grid is vulnerable to cyber attacks from the Iranian forces. And I thought, I know what this is. This is the gray zone. And I only know that from reading Brad Taylor. Brad, can you talk a little bit about what the gray zone is first before we get started?
Yeah, so the gray zone, it's a form of warfare. It's been around for, since warfare has been since we've beaten each other in the head with a club. But it's basically asymmetrical way to fight for usually when you think warfare, you think force on force. It's tanks against tanks, planes against planes, Top Gun, that kind of thing. And then
Right.
on the other end of the scale is total peace, where you're just doing trades and things like that with various countries. Well, in the middle there, it's what's known as a gray zone or hybrid warfare. It's a method of fighting where you're not letting the other guy know it's you. You're getting your goals done by not going toe to toe with them. And it really came about in the modern day after World War II. We had nuclear weapons. Everybody ended up with nuclear weapons, and you ended up with mutually assured destruction. So everybody said, we can't go toe to toe. We'll destroy the earth. So they
Right.
started doing gray zone activities. They said, we're not going to get in a huge fight. We'll do gray zone activities. And then it really came to the forefront in the modern era in 1991 against the United States.
Uh,
Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and
right.
we then took on Saddam Hussein. He had the fourth largest army in the world. People don't realize that. His army was much bigger than ours. and we defeated his army in 100 hours. We sat there and went, "Woo, look at us go." Well, the rest of the world said, "Holy moly, you're not taking the United States on. We're
Yeah,
not taking them on. We're doing gray zone activities."
right,
So the gray zone activities example would be uh, the China, what you just mentioned, North Korean hack and Sony,
right.
Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, where they're doing all these loan sharking type operations. Ukraine's a good example of the gray zone. When they in 2014, when Putin went in there, he sent in what's known as Little Green Men. It was actually Spetsnaz, his version of special forces, and he said, "Hey, that's not us. That's a
That's
spontaneous uprising. We're just going
yeah,
to go in there and help them." And that's a gray
yeah,
zone activity. Iran is a master at gray zone activities. Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis. When Hezbollah is shooting rockets, Iran says that's not us. That's Hezbollah. When
right.
Hamas does October 7th, Iran says that's not us. That's Hamas. Well, on the other side, when Israel, assassinates nuclear scientists inside Tehran or blows up somebody from the IRGC, the Republican Guard inside Tehran, they never acknowledge that. They just say that that happened. And we're not
Yeah,
immune to it either. I mean, the Bay of Pigs is a prime gray zone activity. All these guys are going to take over Fidel Castro in Cuba. It's a spontaneous uprising. If you ignore the fact that we trained them, equipped them, and shipped them down there, we weren't saying America's invading. That was a gray zone activity.
yeah.
That's kind
Small,
of where it
small
is
detail.
on the spectrum.
It's fascinating. So then let's talk about your gray zone. So Pike Logan, our hero, thwarts an attack between the CIA and India's not special forces,
Research and analysis wing, their
research
version
and
of the
analysis,
CIA.
their version of the CIA. And both of these governments think it's just a blip, it's just a small terrorist activity, but our hero has a sense that it's something larger, and all hell ensues.
Yeah.
Um,
So that, and actually it's pretty topical now because we started doing this tariff war with China, and the first thing
yeah,
China did was say we're not exporting rare earth elements.
I was,
And rare earth elements are, if people don't understand what they are, they're not really rare. They're all over the place. They're just really hard to find in concentrations worth of getting out of the ground. And when you get them out of the ground, it's incredibly messy and incredibly destructive to the environment. Because of that, we don't have any rare earth element mines or refining here in the United States.
right,
China actually has 80% of the mining and refining capacity of the world is in China.
which
And
is
why does
which
that
has
matter?
been yeah, which has been a huge news item recently with
Right. And
right,
people, say, why does it matter? Well, in modern day, rare earth elements are used in everything that's has modern technology in it. If it's got a screen, if it's got a silicone chip, if it's got a lithium battery, anything we use from your computers, your cell phones, your cars,
right,
requires rare earth elements, which on the one hand would just be a nuisance if we didn't have it, but it also, if you think about national defense, hypersonic missiles, the F-35 stealth fighter, everything that we use in national defense requires rare earth
right.
elements,
Well,
and we can't get
and
them.
right, and just the computing magnitude that we need to
Right.
maintain our defense. So
So
that
that's
was
kind of the juxtaposition of the gray zone here is China. As I was doing the research for the book, I was over in India running around over there, and this guy,
I
I still didn't
I
have
want to
the
talk about going to India, but go ahead.
sure. I still didn't have the main fight of what is it I had the Sikh separatism. I'd already done the research on that, but I didn't know, okay, what is this main fight? I didn't want to go with Pakistan. That's easy. They have nukes. India has nukes. Let's do the nuke thing. I didn't want to do that. And I knew a lot about rare earth elements just because of how precious they are for our national defense.
Yeah.
And this taxi driver, who's very proud, said, we just found here is an enormous quantity of rare earth elements in the north of India. We're going to start excavating that. And I was like, wow, that's it. There's my plot.
The taxi
So,
driver gave you the center of
taxi
the
driver.
conflict of your plot?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
thought you were going to talk about the Sikh separatists, who are a huge element, of course, of this
Yeah. So
drama.
that came out. I just what started this whole trail to go to India was usually I see some kind of news story and it just piques my interest. And in this case, about a year ago, um, there was a Sikh, just a Sikh in Canada who was killed. Drive-by shooting, no big deal. Didn't even make the news in the United States. Well, then 4 days later, the Canadian government came out and said, hey, this guy was assassinated. The Research and Analysis Wing, the RAW, sent a guy over here under the pretense of the Indian government to kill this guy. And I was like, what? That is
What?
crazy.
Yeah.
Because, you think Iran would do that or Putin would
Right.
throw you out of a window, but
Right.
democracies don't send assassins to other democracies. On the other hand, I thought the Canadian government wouldn't come out and say that unless they had
Yeah.
absolute proof. So that
Yeah.
got my interest going. And then about a month after that, our own FBI arrested somebody here in the United States and said, this guy's trying to kill a Sikh. And oh, by the way, the Raw sent him here. And I was like, okay, there's enough of a story there. And so I started doing the research, and it drove me towards India.
Had you been to India before? I understand that actually being
No,
on the ground influenced greatly the arc of the
yeah,
piece and the visuals of the piece. Can you talk about that?
yeah. So if I can get on the ground, I definitely will. I mean, a lot of people can write just using Google Earth, and I can't. Every culture is different. The sight, sound, smells of the battlefield, like we used to call it, it's always different in every different country. I mean, like if you go to Japan and you get on the metro, how many people can get on a metro in Japan? One more. I mean, they're cramming there. But if you get on the metro in Austria, it's after you, after you,
After you.
after you.
No, after
And
you.
so
Yeah.
and so you want to capture that in the book. I want to experience it. And in this case, in India, there's always something. I usually say there's 50% I'm looking for. I go with a list. Here's what I'm going to look at.
Yeah.
But there's 50% that's looking for me that I don't even know exists. And in this case, in India, actually, the culmination of the book is there's a billionaire in India who's a real guy
Right.
who owns the most expensive residential building in the world outside of Buckingham Palace. I think Buckingham Palace is number one. This building is number two. It costs
And
$3 billion to make. It's 27 stories tall. It's got 6 floors of antique cars. It's got a room that does snow,
I was
and
just
it's
going to
there
say,
for
doesn't it has a snow room? It
yeah.
has,
It's got
yeah,
everything. It's got a staff of 300, and it's for a family of four. And
yeah.
that when you're in Mumbai running
Outside of
around,
Mumbai, right?
it's right
One,
inside Mumbai on
oh,
Billionaires Row, and they always tell you everywhere you go, hey, there's this guy. They're really proud of it. Well, I
yeah,
never knew that thing existed. As soon as I saw it, it looked like Doctor Doom's lair. I was like, that's making the book. But I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't got on the ground. Another instance, just for cultural flavor, was I would have thought that Mumbai was a kind of a metropolitan city like New York, a melting pot.
yeah,
And Pike's doing a lot of dismounted surveillance. He's going to follow the bad guy here, follow the bad guy there, send Jennifer to do this or whatever. The team's going to do some kind of surveillance. Well, I was on the ground for about, I don't know, 8 hours, and I was like, that's not working. I mean, it is so homogenous. I stood out everywhere I went, even in Mumbai. Forget about Goa and Delhi and Jaipur and some of these areas that were much more ethnic. This Mumbai itself, I wasn't getting anywhere. I was like, you didn't have to be thought of doing something nefarious, but everybody's still going to stare at you. You're not getting away with following anybody. Everybody looks at you. More people went up to my wife to get a selfie, handing me the phone, take our picture, or they wanted to practice their English, or they just wanted to converse. When we went to the train station, which was just a mass of humanity, it was like a record scratch. Everybody's looking like, what are they doing here? Not in a mean way. They just were curious. And so I was like, there's no way Pike's going to get any dismounted surveillance done over here. But I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't gotten over there on the ground.
yeah, of course. I mean, it changed the course of how you were conceiving your characters, right? You
Yeah,
had
it
to
changes the
actually,
course of the mission set. I mean, when I was in the military, we used to have to do this mission planning anyway. But so now you just sit there and think, okay, I've still got the mission to do. Pike's still going to have to do dismounted surveillance. I just got to figure
right.
out how will he do it now.
Right, exactly. One of the things that I love about your writing is the authority you have, and that line between fiction and fact is sometimes difficult because you do write with such experience and such authority. For instance, you were talking about the rare earth minerals in China and India.
Hmm.
That's real. But the actual task force that Pike Logan and his team works for is not real. Or is it real? Please tell us, Brad, what's the line
No,
there?
it's definitely not real. And the reason for that is when I first started, I've served in a lot of classified organizations. And when I was writing my first book, I didn't want anybody. I was going to write a story of redemption. I didn't really care about, I wasn't writing a military thriller. I had no writing experience whatsoever. So you Google, how do I write a novel? And they say, write what you know. So if I'd have been a police officer, Pike would have been a cop. If I'd have been a priest, Jennifer would have been a nun. I
Right.
happen to be a counterterrorist commando guy, so I'm going to write what I know.
Right.
Well, all of my organizations were classified, and I didn't want anybody to think that I was writing about real units and just changing the names. So I created the task force out of whole cloth. And I mean, we used to fantasize about it. We'd sit there and say, boy, I really wish we had something like this because it's hard getting missions done. And I'd be really neat if we had that. And so when I created it, though, I knew there would be left and right limits. It wouldn't just be allowed to run amok. So I created the Oversight Council. I made a charter for what they can do. They wouldn't duplicate the CIA. They wouldn't duplicate special mission units or the NSA. They have their own lane that they're in, the task force is. But it doesn't really exist, but it would be really fun if it did.
All right. Well, no comment there, but moving on, I have to say that one of the things that I loved about this book, as I told you earlier, my husband is a huge fan of yours. He's read every book you've ever written, and this is my first time experiencing the excitement of your work. But one of the things I loved was Pike Logan's wife, Jennifer, who is brilliant, beautiful, a badass, incredibly capable. And then I realized I had met your wife a couple months ago at our event in Orange County, and I thought, where have I seen this character before? Did you consciously build Jennifer around Elaine, or how does that work for you? How do you build characters from people in your own life?
No, so I mean, obviously, some of my wife's in there because I live with her every day. But Jennifer was conceived solely as when she first starts out, she's pure civilian, doesn't know anything, but she has I don't know if it was in this book, but she used to work for Cirque du Soleil. That's where she
Mm,
gets her skills from. So she has a skill that manifests itself, unbeknownst to her. It's actually a useful skill for what they need. And so she ends up coming forward and starting to work with the task force. And
yeah,
Pike eventually, of course, they weren't married when they first started. They eventually go into the task force. And she was originally black and white is, there's good things, there's bad things. She was Immanuel Kant. She was categorical imperative. You don't do this and you can do that. And Pike's moral compass was broken. And he was like, the greater good. Whatever happens here, if I do it, it's for the greater good. So if somebody gets hurt, that's okay because the greater good's on the other end of it, and they've slowly grown together on that. So she's become a little bit more gray. He's become a lot more back on his moral compass. And that shift, is it's hard to do to make sure the characters are growing. But she has definitely come a long way from when she first appeared.
you've had a lot of characters to manage. You have a daughter in this book that developed from one of your other stories. Can you talk about that, the foster daughter?
Yeah, so that's I give 100% to every book I write, and just this is it. And I don't think about the future, and I wish I did, but I don't. I'm like 100% on this one. So in one book, Daughter of War, it actually was a different title. I had Amina, who was a Syrian refugee who was going to exit stage left in chapter 4. She was gone. Wasn't sure how she was going to leave. Maybe she ran away. Her whole point was just to get Pike onto the plot. And by chapter 4, I liked her too much. And so she took over the entire book until it became Daughter of War. The title even changed.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite books. It's a really good book. But at the end of it, now what? She exists. I mean, she's in the Pike universe now. What do I do?
Right.
And so I actually told my publisher the next book was going to open at a funeral. Poor Amina, hit by a car. Nothing we could do. So she's been in it for, there's you've got to people who read the series are going to say what
Right.
happened to Amina. So I have to have her in there, and
Right.
then figure out how I'm going to use her. And then usually it's she's going away somewhere to do something, school
Yeah.
trip or something.
School trip, right? When
Yeah,
she gets old enough to be out of school, you're going to be in trouble. But
yeah.
anyway, I want to shift gears a little bit and finish off by asking you about your life as a writer, because you were active
Mhm.
all of those years. Then you moved to the Citadel to be a professor, and then you made the choice to follow a dream I believe you'd had for many years. Can you talk about that? how you wanted to
Yeah.
be a writer and when you made the decision to actually jump in with both feet.
Yeah, I didn't ever really think I would be a writer as a profession. I was just always a voracious reader. And so I always just had in the back of my head that one of these days I would write a book. I haven't, I had no aspirations or arrogance that I would be a published writer. I thought it would sit on my bedside table and my mom would say, "You're a really good writer, Brad. Love that book." And that'd be the end of it. And when I got to the Citadel, I'd left a special mission unit. I was constantly deployed. And the Citadel was 9 to 5. I enjoyed teaching, but it was 9 to 5. I mean,
Yeah.
at 10 in the morning, I'd be like, what are we doing now? And once you built the classes, it's kind of rinse and repeat. What I teach on Monday, I'm teaching Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Yeah.
Monday the next week, and so by the second year, I was kind of bored and out of time. So I told my wife, I'm going to write a book. And she was like, well, whatever. And so I wrote the book and One Rough Man. And surprisingly, it sold. And I came out on the promotion list to Bird Colonel. My next assignment was 2 years unaccompanied to Pakistan. My daughter was entering high school, a lot of competing interests. And
Yeah.
so I had to make a decision. And I couldn't publish the book if I was staying in the military because I was going back to the classified world. There was no way that just wouldn't work.
Mhm.
So I either was going to publish this book or I was going back in the military. And I decided to retire from the military. I turned down the promotion, retired from the military, and said I'll give writing a try. And it's worked out. No one's more
It's,
surprised than me.
I would say that it's worked out. I mean, umpteen New York Times bestseller books, and this just made the New York Times bestseller list, didn't it? I mean,
Yeah, it did.
yeah. So you're doing okay.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, what from your military background, what about being a soldier has actually helped you as a writer? Because those are two ways of being that don't seem similar, but maybe they are.
They are. You'd be surprised. So I was a commander, and as a commander, and especially in special forces, you've got super smart guys underneath you, very, very, very smart guys. And you're constantly, when you're not at war, you're doing exercises. And when you do the exercise, you need to develop an exercise that they will execute, and you have to give them right and left limits without giving them right and left limits. So
Mm,
you have to design the exercise in such a way that they're going to do A, B, C, and D and not go F or H. Because if they go F or H, that's not our building. You're liable to blow up a real bank or something like that.
yeah,
You got to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. And that entails creating a plot. You've got to give them a legitimate, you can't just say, we're going to Country Orange and it's bad guy Dr. Evil and here's what he's doing. You've got to build up a whole scenario.
a whole
And those
world,
guys are then going to hunt this guy in city streets, foreign lands. I've done it all over the world, where there's actually a risk of compromise with the host nation if they caught you doing some of this stuff, even though you're not doing anything nefarious, you're just doing an exercise, but for them it looks nefarious. So you have to design it in such a way that they do what you want them to do and they get the exercise value out of it. And it's kind of like writing a novel because, Pike can do 1,000 things. He's going to do one. Well, if that one thing doesn't make any sense, and I'll get emails about why did he do A when he could have simply done B? That doesn't make any sense. And developing those exercises kind of helped with that because I was like, I don't want them to go this way. How can I prevent that? I've got to design the intel they get that they will not go that way. So there's a little bit of a crossover.
I had no idea. Fascinating. Well, I know that you're working on your next book. So, and tonight is your night alone to get some
Yeah.
typing done. So I'm not gonna hold you up, but everybody, Brad Taylor, oh, my screen's not letting me do it, but Brad Taylor, you can see bookmarks here. Thank you so much. What, can you give us a hint of what's coming next? Maybe?
Yeah. So we came back from Argentina. I did a lot of research in Argentina. I'd known this for a while, but believe it or not, the biggest uh, concentration of Hezbollah, the terrorists that are in Lebanon, the biggest concentration of Hezbollah is in the triple frontier of Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. That's where they all are
God,
in
I had
South
no idea.
America.
Wow.
Actually, there's more Lebanese inside Brazil than there are in Lebanon.
No idea.
And so that was a little bit, I saw that and said, there's a story down there somewhere. So that's what I'm writing about now.
And there'll be some tango, maybe?
Yeah, that's what Elaine wanted to do. I did go see a tango show. I told her it's not making the book.
Not big of a one next time. Brad, please come back for this next book. We'd love to talk to you again. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a great night. Appreciate
You
it.
too.
All right, everybody. That was Brad Taylor himself in the flesh. So next, let's listen to what Jess Walter has to say about his new book, So Far Gone. This National Book Award finalist and internationally best-selling author might be most associated with his stirring historical fiction, like Beautiful Ruins and The Cold Millions. But Jess has also been called a genius of the modern American moment and a spot news novelist. And it's the latter where So Far Gone is squarely placed. It's laced with incisive observations that speak to our present day divide, even as the story weaves what I would call a timeless tale of redemption. So you take one sanctimonious, reclusive former newspaper reporter, and you add one conspiracy-addled son-in-law, and you flavor with two cute grandkids and a Christian separatist militia and a handful of other characters who have their own agendas, and you stir with a fist fight at Thanksgiving dinner and a kidnapping and a frantic road trip, and you bake all that in a politically fractured environment that's overheated by information. And you know what? That's the recipe for Jess's compulsively readable, thought-provoking, and endlessly entertaining new novel. And that hit the bookstores June 10th, and I spoke with him earlier this month. Julie, can you roll the tape, please? Jess, welcome to Bookish. We so appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I have to say, we talked a little bit beforehand, but what I didn't tell you is I saw a quote that called you a genius of the modern American moment. And that was even before So Far Gone. But certainly it applies to So Far Gone. I was nodding my head often. I was laughing hysterically sometimes, and I was crying in my coffee at other
Yeah,
times reading this book. Um, you've said that your work grows out of fragments or situations or lines, and I didn't see you at Thanksgiving dinner, so it didn't actually come from my Thanksgiving dinner. But what did inspire the premise of So Far Gone?
I hope this wasn't your Thanksgiving dinner.
Well, it's
You
been
know,
close, let me tell you, a few
yeah,
times.
there were actually several pieces which I think of the way snowflakes kind of gather as they fall and they form a larger snowflake. And that feels like for me what a short story or a novel begins with is two or three things falling from the sky at the same time. First of all, the urge to just throw my cell phone out a window and turn my back on all of the news and the world and what to do with that feeling and that urge. And even though that wasn't my Thanksgiving, like every family, like every person, I've experienced a fissure with people that I once was closer to because of the political reality we find ourselves in now, and that and really reality itself. I have a friend from elementary school who's a flat earther now. We were science kids together, and I don't know how to relate to that person. And so I don't think the culture has ever been riven personally like this since the 1960s, when it was the establishment versus the anti-establishment kids, parents, the generation gap. And we have a different gap now that is not a generation gap, it's a reality gap. It's what information you take in and what world you see because of that. And so those snowflakes were all kind of falling. My brother and sister and I were selling the land that we've owned forever, that has been in our family. And all of those pieces, and it's where I send Kinnick in the novel. I have him throw it. Reese Kinnick, the protagonist of the novel, throws his cell phone out a window and drives to the very place that my brother and sister and I lived when I was a kid, which is still there, a cinder block house. And so in those ways, they all kind of came together. And you talked about being a writer of the current moment. And a few times in my career, after 9/11 with my novel The Zero, and after the financial crisis of 2008 with The Financial Lives of the Poets, and now I feel very much like I'm just going to put my head out the window and describe what it feels like as the car goes off the road. And that's what I tried to do with this novel in the last couple of years, is really imagine what this fissure is costing us.
Well, you did it to brilliant effect. I
Oh,
don't
thank,
care
thank you
what
so much.
anybody else says. Just remember I said you did it to brilliant
All right,
effect.
I'll remember that. Yeah.
A lot of us know and love you from your historical fiction. I
Yeah.
have to say, you've written many books, as I said in the introduction, but certainly your historical fiction is beloved, and millions of readers will attest to that. And even in your historical works, there are political and social themes that resonate into the present moment. And I found an interview you did about the Cold Millions, one of your other books that takes place in the Spokane area. And you said the trick was not to get lost in politics and to avoid being didactic, preachy, speechy, or bending historical figures to cultural norms of 2021. Much of fiction writing is getting various balances right or trying to. And I was balancing my desire to say something about the current time with my desire to tell a rip-roaring adventure story. It just made me wonder. I loved that quote. It just made me wonder, what were you trying to balance in So Far Gone? Because you, you
Yeah,
tell a rip-roaring
it's
story.
funny. The balance is very different, and I write across all genres. I've written novels that are crime novels, and yeah, novels set in the 1960s and then set in the early 1900s. And to
Mhm.
write something this contemporary is to write into the thing that people are living and experiencing. And so many people are turned off by politics right now. And but what do we really mean by that? It's affecting our lives in ways that this isn't about donkeys and elephants. It's about who we are as a people. And so I wanted to write directly into that. I didn't want to write an allegory. I wanted to write someone who's confronted with that very thing, with a family member whose conspiracy thinking sends him, off the rails. But to me, the balance in a novel like this is not making it about parties or policies, but about people. And it really, Reese Kinnick, the character who gets fed up and moves out to the woods, is in no way a standard hero. He turns his back on his family. He runs away from the world. He's flawed in every way. And I think making Shane, his son-in-law and kind of his foil, just as human is the
Yeah.
only way I know to balance those things. This novel hopefully captures a moment that we're in, but you write a novel that you hope someone will read 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and find truth in it. And I think the truth of how we deal with one another when our basic sense of the world and what it is are at odds is, it almost balances the story itself. I also sent Reese and his sidekick Brian, Spokane tribal member, Spokane Indian, up to probably the wildest electronica festival up in the woods. And so it isn't only looking at the sort of right-wing lunacy, it's also looking at kind of left-wing lunacy and a world that just seems a little bit off its axis right now, in all ways. And so I think that's the way I tried to balance it. But it really is just writing about people and humans and making them fallible and real, hopefully.
Well, they were. And at the end of the day, it's about relationships. It's about love and relationships and how we connect to each other. And that's what I found most emotionally resonant.
Yeah, thank you. And it really is a sort of love story about a father and
You
his
know,
daughter, like
and
reconciling after years um of also not seeing the same world.
yes.
It isn't only politics that divides us, it's our own experience of the same situations that sometimes makes us, siloed in our understanding of the world. And that is what I had to cling to in the end. And I've had several readers who said, I was a little worried about the politics, but then that fell away and it really became about these people
It really became about how we relate to or not relate to each other. And that's true over time and over generations.
and how we find our way back, hopefully.
How
Yeah.
we hopefully how we find our way back. It was very hopeful. Not to give it away, but the ending really is
All right.
hopeful. I
Stick
want to
with it.
talk. Oh, sorry.
No, no, I just said stick with it. The ending is hopeful.
Yeah, stick with no, you can't help but stick with it because it's propulsive. You just have to find out what
Thank
in the character of Dick, the ex-police officer who is
you.
the private investigator. I got such a kick out of him. The description of how he drives his pickup truck was just my uncle and
Oh, that's great.
completely. I felt
Yeah.
like I knew these people. But I
Yeah.
want to talk to you a little bit about journalism itself because I know that you're a former journalist. That's where you cut your teeth, and we
Yeah,
were talking earlier. That's how you still somehow self-define.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Reese Kinnick, the
Mhm.
protagonist, is a former journalist.
Right.
His ex-girlfriend, who plays a part in the novel, also is a current journalist.
Mhm.
And for me, as I mentioned to you, a lot of the meaning of the book comes from the idea of journalism and its current failures. The breakdown of information systems to me was one of the most vivid antagonistic forces in the book. And it was interesting because there are a few straight up villainous characters, but only a few. Most of the characters are somehow broken and they're at the effect of this toxic information system we find ourselves in. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, to start at the beginning of that, I do think of myself. Journalism was my training ground. It's where I really learned to write and to think and to do a thing that I think journalists have above almost every profession, which is to just satisfy this intense curiosity about a few things, you know. And sometimes when I approach a novel, I almost think of myself as a spot news novelist. You know, it's
Love that.
like the world's cracking up because of the death of the very thing, the very profession that I had. You know, what you called an information system crisis is really what we face. We are being given totally different sets of information with no check or balance on whether or not it's true. And so every truth becomes the same in some way. And
Yes.
um, and whether you are you know, whether CNN is your chosen news source or MSNBC or Fox News, just watch the other one, watch one of the other ones for an entire day and see what a different set of information they're
Yes.
giving. And it's no wonder we have such a different view of the world. We are getting completely different information. And
It's astounding. Yes.
astounding. And that, to me, we haven't dealt with the crisis of that. And so, having left newspapers, my wife kept working in a newspaper for a while. My brother is still the sports editor of
Um,
Middle
okay, just
newspaper.
side note, I knew you had to have somebody in a newsroom currently because the way Lucy goes through the shrunken newsroom and how everyone has a side gig to make ends meet, I thought that is so of the current moment.
Yeah,
Don't.
I mean, I still remember going to a bar and seeing my brother's best reporter tending bar, you know, and it's a good sized newspaper, but he needed that side hustle to,
Yeah.
you know, to be able to afford his apartment. And so, yeah, that and so, you know, to have this be Reese's career, again, you have to take this, you take the larger and make it personal. And so um, he's feeling a bit like he's been pushed out of the world at the same time that the world is suffering from the lack of the thing that he once did. So he takes very personally the misinformation and the um, the fractured world that he sees. And I think as I do, I really do feel like, you know, sometimes people will long for the day when Walter Cronkite could unite the country. And of course, the country was never united, but there was at least a basic sense that this is the world that we face. This is what
We had
happened.
a shared reality.
A shared
Right.
reality. This is what happened in Watergate.
Right.
Republicans voted to, you know, against their president because of that shared reality, and we don't have that now. And so, yeah, it crushes me for the loss of a profession that I started when I was 19, and that brought me into the world as a writer and taught me more about writing and the way I look at the world than certainly anything else. And then I mourn it for the culture because I think that's even more dangerous and insidious. And I think what ails us is that common reality. I look for some place for that to return.
Yeah, it just occurred to me as you were speaking, that's what working class kids like us did to become writers, right? We
Right?
became
Yeah.
newspaper reporters.
I
There
think
was
there was
no
only I think there was only a 4-year gap between me tossing newspapers on porches to
to actually writing them.
to covering sports stories for my local hometown paper.
Well, speaking of a story that you covered the Ruby Ridge standoff in the late 1990s, right? And then you wrote what is considered by many to be the definitive book on that standoff, which, along with Waco, is often attributed to be one of the roots of the anti-government um, hatred that we see manifest in MAGA today. Was that on your mind as you were building the world of So Far Gone, especially the Rampart and other sections of the book in particular?
Yeah, I mean, Ruby Ridge has been on my mind for 30 some years. First of all, so for people who don't know, it was a standoff between a white separatist family and the federal government, and there were violations of Randy Weaver's family's civil rights. It was essentially a civil rights case, but on the far right instead of the left, which is where I think civil rights cases often came from. But I remember so the Weavers get into a gunfight. U.S. Marshals killed Randy Weaver's son. Later, his wife is shot to death by FBI agents. There's an 11-day standoff, the longest trial in Idaho history. And then the Weavers were acquitted because of these government mess ups. But at the root of this were these issues that I was stunned to see protesters come out with these anti-government signs, and then to watch the way in which some politicians made the most of that, campaigning against the very job they were aspiring to, being in the government. And I just always had this image of them sawing off the branch that they were on.
Uh,
And what felt fringe at the time is now entirely mainstream. There is nothing that the white separatists and skinheads, there's no sign that they were carrying that I couldn't imagine coming out of an elected official's mouth, or a town council or something. And so to watch what was fringe move into the mainstream over the last few years has been really jarring. And then to watch the effect of that, the lack of faith in institutions. It used to be people loved their own libraries and schools. Doesn't matter, they may be cynical about government, but their kid had a great teacher at school. Their library was a place. Even those institutions, certainly journalism as an institution, has lost ground. And so, to constantly be sawing off these branches that we are on, the effect of that over the years is again another one that I think we're living with. Government is made up of people. It's made up of human beings doing their best. Again, go to your local school where your kids hopefully got a pretty good education, and that's what government is. It's the sheriff's deputy who comes out, when someone breaks into your car. To so completely erode our trust in institutions with it in such a cynical way. I think about Ruby Ridge all the time. And then I think about the effect it had on the people, on humans, on real human beings trying to live their lives and understand the world. And, Randy Weaver's family moving to a mountaintop and having whatever beliefs they felt like they could have, and not really violating anyone else's rights. They had every right to do that. And so I always, in my writing, try to return to the effects it has on the people and the human beings.
Yeah, I felt very much that spirit in
Yeah,
this novel. I want to talk about the world of the story, the Pacific Northwest, which is the landscape that influences many of your works, and certainly is a big part of the story here. This landscape, I was telling you earlier, made me think of a lecture by the poet Robert Pinsky I heard years ago, where Bob was talking about the landscape of his imagination, which for him is a rainy day on a street in Brooklyn.
yeah.
Can you talk about the Pacific Northwest and the influence it has on your imagination and maybe on this novel?
Yeah, it's funny. I've lived in my hometown, Spokane, Washington, my whole life. Ventured only 15 miles away for college, and then I go out and teach various places. I travel for work. I go, last year spent 5 weeks in Italy doing research. So I get to go a lot of places, but this place is so a part of me. And I think that may be unusual for a writer. Most writers sort of congregate near New York or Los Angeles. And so to be in the place that I'm from, I think it has a special gravity in my work. And I love thinking of Pinsky, imagining, because I imagine a rainy Brooklyn day of those poems, and
Yeah,
yeah. And so The Northwest is a varied place. A
Mhm.
reporter just came out to interview me, and he talked about driving through these incredibly different landscapes, the Cascade Mountains to all of a sudden the desert of central Washington
I
to
was going to say the Eastern
yeah,
Washington.
yeah.
Yeah.
To then you get to Spokane and you're at the edge of that vast forest that goes all the way to the Rocky Mountains in Idaho and Montana. So you pass through these, and I think of that sometimes that is where these hard landscapes come together.
Mhm.
And that often affects the people as well. And I mean, it's a place that I love for its natural beauty, for its out of the wayness. I'm constantly telling writers from New York, next time you're in Spokane, come stay with me. And no one has ever taken me up on it
No
because
one ever goes to
no,
Spokane.
there's no reason.
Yes.
Exactly right. They fly right over it on their way to Seattle.
It-
So, but these are things that I really love about it, and I think it's an amazing place for a storyteller because of the sudden changes in those in landscape and in personality and in people and um, living as I do in a blue city in a red county next to North Idaho, one of the most conservative places in the world, in a blue state, Washington, you feel the push and pull of those things. And then those places where people come together um, seem almost holy in a way. Anyone who is cynical about the world needs to go to a barter fair in northeastern Washington because you will find the far left and the far right, and you'll find the place where they
Coming
come
together. I
and
love it.
it's in homemade soap or it's in
Honey.
honey.
Organic
It's in
honey
honey.
from
It's in organic honey,
Spain.
right?
Yeah.
Here's where we can agree that organic honey is the greatest thing in the world.
I
That's an
love
even better choice.
I
So
love
yeah,
it.
I love that about the place, and I love setting my fiction in it. My last book was called The Angel of Rome. Beautiful Ruins is probably my most well-known book, also set in Italy. And so the two things I love the most as a writer are leaving home and then coming back.
Coming back.
And
Do you just
with
Oh, go
So
ahead.
Far Gone, I felt like I got to come back and write not only about Spokane and North Idaho, but the very ranch that my family lived on as a kid.
I love that. I love that. As you were talking, it occurred to me that people talk about Los Angeles as a place people escape to reinvent themselves. Uh,
Right.
from my own family, I shared with you earlier that my aunt and uncle had a ranch up by Arlington,
Yeah.
Washington, and it occurred to me that people go to the Pacific Northwest not to reinvent themselves, but to just just disappear, just
Yeah.
completely.
I think most families who grew up here can find someone who wanted to go where there were no people,
Yeah.
you know, who wanted to, which is kind of what So Far Gone is about. It's about,
Yes.
Kinnick really wants to um, separate himself from the world, and the Northwest was one of the last empty places. Many parts of it. I mean, Seattle and Portland obviously are pretty big cities, but Spokane is a city of 200 and some thousand and a metro about 600,000. But the nearest big cities are 4, 5, 6 hours away.
Yeah.
Like Boise, Idaho is my neighbor, and Seattle and Portland, and they are a long car drive away. And so to be in a place that remote, yeah, it creates these amazing stories and these amazing collisions of culture.
Love it. I have to ask you a question about writing because I've heard you describe yourself as a chronic rewriter.
Yeah.
So, Jess, how do you know when you're done if you're always rewriting?
I mean, I'm about to go out on book tour, and I will open the book, and yeah, I don't read very much because I've been doing readings for almost 30 years, and I've yet to have someone say, "I wish you'd read a little more." So
Yeah.
I try to read just a small amount of when I go out on readings, but as I do, I find myself wanting to keep changing sentences. Oh, that word, this one's a little clunky. So, um, you know, when I think about rewriting, I get to a point where I know the novel has completed the thing that I set out to do, and when that happens, it's time to do my very best to get it in shape and get it out in the world. It's completed the movement that it's set out to make. And that's kind of a tricky thing to know, but with So Far Gone, for instance, I wrote to the point where I felt this catharsis and I felt this sense that the characters had taken the journey I sent them on. And at that point, it's all right, now I just need to make this, make the music as clear and resonant as possible. And so I was up until the very last minute, I was begging to make a change, you know, before. I'm surprised I wasn't at the printer, like crossing out words and trying to put new ones in. But luckily, there's always a new novel
I
to
was going
obsess
to
over.
say.
So
I was going to say, do you finish one and just start immediately on the next? Is that
I tend to be working on two or three things at once. Beautiful Rooms took me 15 years to write, but I wrote three novels inside
in
those 15
in the
years.
space of
And
them?
so I like to always have a big, unwieldy, philosophical thing, usually with a larger scope, that I'm working on while I'm writing a novel like So Far Gone that is more self-contained, takes
Yeah.
place in only a few days.
Mm.
You know, and so yeah, I'm deep in the next novel and torturing its sentences now.
Can't wait. And just, I have to tell you before I let you go, not only did I feel moved and provoked by this novel, but I laughed.
Oh,
You are
good.
all in all your works that I've read, I always laugh, but the humor in this one is really something. It's really
Yeah,
cool.
that's important to me that we, and not in a joking comical way, but almost in a philosophical way, that we understand we are only here for a short time. Our folly is in many ways comic, you know, even though there are very serious things behind it and serious things happen in the novel. It's the way I look at the world, is that we are, you know, we are every bit the slapstick characters trying to make our way through an imperfect world.
Love it. Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you for coming on. Thank you for sharing this with us. And I'm just going to wrangle a commitment from you. The next novel, come back and see us.
I will. I will. Thank you, Samantha.
Good luck. Well, you guys, thank you so much for being here. And thank Brad and Jess for joining us tonight. Also, as always, thanks to our magical production manager, Julie Corlett, who makes everything work. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's conversations. Bookish will be back next month with another lineup of great authors. Ariana Triagani, along with audiobook narrator Rebecca Lucas and her sister, our own Emily St. Martin, who's a features editor here. Meanwhile, please enjoy catching up with our past episodes and check out our other virtual programs too. If you'd like to share your thoughts from today, I know some of you had some. Oh, and by the way, yes, my hair did change colors between interviews, just so you know, to answer that question. If you have thoughts from today or additional questions, please email us at events@scng.com. And if you want to give me suggestions or complaints or whatever on the show directly, reach me at sdunn@scng.com. Remember, you can always find great books coverage in our newspapers every single day and online at all of our sites. Have a great night, and I'm going to see you next time, I hope. Thanks, everybody.